Why would the Alpha King need a room no one was allowed to enter? The question spread through Moonrest Palace faster than a winter wind, whispered between servants, guards, cooks, and noble guests who thought they knew every secret hidden behind the castle's stone walls. Yet this secret belonged to Damian Blackthorne alone. It began on a gray morning when the king halted an important council meeting halfway through and walked out without explanation. No one dared question him. Not openly. They simply watched as he crossed the palace courtyard and disappeared into the long-abandoned eastern wing, a place that had stood empty for years. By sunset, craftsmen had arrived. By midnight, royal guards stood outside a pair of massive oak doors. By dawn, the rumors had already begun. Rosalie Hart first heard them while carrying fresh linens through the servant corridors. She lowered her eyes and continued walking as two maids chatted nearby. They say His Majesty is building a private sanctuary. For what? No one knows. Rosalie kept moving. People rarely noticed her anyway. She was accustomed to being overlooked. In a palace filled with nobles wearing velvet and jewels, an Omega servant with simple dresses and quiet manners was easy to forget. Most days, Rosalie preferred it that way. Invisible people avoided trouble. Invisible people survived. But even she could not ignore what happened next. 3 wagons arrived at the palace gates before noon. Not carrying furniture. Not carrying gold. Straw. Clean golden straw stacked so high that it nearly spilled over the wagon rails. Guards supervised every bundle as though it were treasure. Servants gathered near windows to watch. Stable workers exchanged confused looks. The palace steward demanded an explanation and received only a brief response from the captain of the guard. By order of the king. The next day brought 5 more wagons. Then 7. Then 10. Straw filled the eastern wing. Straw filled storage rooms. Straw disappeared behind the forbidden doors. Nobody understood why. Rosalie happened to pass through the courtyard when another shipment arrived. She paused only for a moment. Sunlight reflected from the straw, turning it almost gold. One guard noticed her watching. "Keep moving," he said. She immediately nodded and continued on her way. Still, curiosity lingered. What kind of room required that much straw? The answer never came. Every question met a wall of silence. Damian Blackthorne issued only one command. No one enters. Not servants. Not advisors. Not nobles. Not even members of the royal council. The order stunned the kingdom. Some believed the king was hiding a priceless artifact. Others claimed he was preparing for war. A few whispered about ancient magic. The wildest rumors spoke of a creature hidden behind those doors. Each story became more unbelievable than the last. Yet the truth remained locked away. Weeks passed. The mystery grew larger. So did the king's strange behavior. Damian visited the eastern wing every evening without fail. Sometimes he carried blankets. Sometimes he carried books. Once, an entire shipment of handmade pillows arrived from a village nearly 200 miles away. Every item disappeared behind the forbidden doors. Rosalie noticed these things because she happened to be nearby, not because she was important. Quite the opposite. Her duties often placed her in forgotten corners of the palace. While nobles attended banquets and advisors discussed policy, she dusted shelves, organized linens, and completed tasks no one else wanted. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that she saw the king emerge from the eastern wing. Damian Blackthorne was known throughout the territories as a powerful ruler. Commanding, reserved, impossible to read. Yet for the briefest moment, as the doors closed behind him, something unusual crossed his face. Not anger, not concern, something softer, something almost protective. Rosalie quickly lowered her gaze before he noticed her staring. When she finally looked up again, he was gone. She told herself it meant nothing. Kings had responsibilities ordinary people could never understand. Whatever existed inside that room had nothing to do with her. Still, that night, as she lay awake in her small servant quarters, she found herself thinking about the locked doors, about the endless wagons of straw, about the king who guarded a secret more carefully than any treasure in his kingdom. And somewhere deep within the palace, beyond walls few people dared approach, a room waited in silence. A room no one could enter. A room prepared with extraordinary care. A room that, though Rosalie did not know it yet, had been built for a reason that would change her life forever. Rosalie Hart had worked in Moonrest Palace for almost 3 years, Yet she could count on one hand the number of times anyone had spoken her name that week. Most people simply called her girl, servant, or Omega. She had learned long ago that correcting them changed nothing. Life was easier when expectations stayed low. It was why she moved quietly through crowded hallways, why she kept her eyes lowered during royal gatherings, and why she never drew attention to herself even when she noticed things others missed. Recently, however, avoiding attention had become difficult because the entire palace seemed obsessed with one mystery. Every conversation eventually returned to the Eastern Wing. Every meal included fresh rumors. Every servant had a theory. By the middle of the month, the deliveries had become impossible to ignore. More wagons arrived almost daily. Not only straw now, soft blankets from northern villages, hand-woven rugs, baskets filled with dried lavender, pillows made from the finest cotton in the kingdom. Rosalie watched workers carry them through the palace courtyard one chilly morning while she hung fresh linens outside to dry. The sight made little sense. Nothing about the room seemed practical. If it were a royal office, it would need desks. If it were a private library, it would need shelves. If it were a guest suite, it would need furniture. Instead, everything being delivered looked comfortable, safe, warm. The thought lingered in her mind longer than she expected. Later that afternoon, while organizing storage closets, she overheard two noblewomen speaking beyond the doorway. "The king has lost interest in courtship," one said with a dramatic sigh. "Perhaps he plans to live inside that room himself." The other laughed. "Then why all the straw? Maybe he has finally gone mad." Their laughter echoed down the corridor before fading away. Rosalie looked down at the folded blankets in her hands. Somehow, she did not believe Damian Blackthorne was the kind of man who did anything without purpose. Everything about him felt deliberate, measured, controlled. Even from a distance, his presence seemed to shape the atmosphere around him. People adjusted their behavior when he entered a room. Conversations stopped. Shoulders straightened. Yet despite all the gossip surrounding the Eastern Wing, the king never offered an explanation. He simply continued his routine. Every evening, shortly before sunset, he disappeared behind the guarded doors. Every morning, he emerged alone. Then one evening something unusual happened. Rosalie had been returning from the kitchens carrying fresh towels when she noticed movement near the eastern corridor. The king stood beside the forbidden doors speaking quietly with the palace steward. She could not hear the conversation, but she noticed Damian examining a small bundle of straw held in his hands. Not all of it, just one piece. He studied it carefully before nodding. The steward immediately took the bundle away as though following an important instruction. Rosalie blinked in surprise. It was only straw, yet the king had inspected it with the same focus nobles used when discussing matters of state. For reasons she could not explain, that image stayed with her. Later that night, lying awake beneath a thin blanket in her modest room, she found herself staring at the ceiling. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, winter winds whispered through the trees. Somewhere inside the eastern wing, guards still stood watch outside a room nobody could enter. And somewhere between those two thoughts, a strange feeling settled inside her chest. Not fear, not curiosity alone, something quieter. As though an invisible thread had begun pulling two distant lives slowly toward the same destination, even if neither of them understood it yet. By the time the first snowfall dusted the palace rooftops, the mystery had become the kingdom's favorite topic. Merchants discussed it in town squares. Noble families debated it during dinner parties. Even travelers arriving from distant territories seemed to know about the strange room hidden within Moonrest Palace. Every new rumor sounded more unbelievable than the last. Some claimed the king was preparing a sacred chamber connected to ancient traditions. Others insisted he was secretly housing a rare magical creature. A visiting duke confidently announced that Damian Blackthorne must be constructing a private retreat where he could escape the endless pressures of ruling. Yet none of them knew the truth. Rosalie certainly did not. She spent her days exactly as she always had. Before sunrise, she helped prepare linens. During the afternoon, she organized supplies throughout the servant wing. In the evenings, she often assisted elderly staff members with tasks that took them longer than they once had. Small things, quiet things, the kind of work that rarely earned recognition. But recently, she had started noticing something strange. Not about the room, about the king. The realization came gradually. A glance during breakfast preparations. A brief encounter in a hallway. A moment in the courtyard while she carried baskets of clean laundry. Each time, Damian seemed aware of her presence. Not in the way a king noticed a servant. In a different way. Once she nearly dropped a stack of folded blankets when another servant rushed around a corner too quickly. Before the blankets could hit the floor, a strong hand steadied the top bundle. Rosalie looked up in surprise. Damian stood there. For a brief second their eyes met. Silver and blue. Calm and startled. Then he released the blankets and continued walking as though nothing had happened. She remained frozen for several seconds afterward. The king had not spoken a word. Yet somehow the moment lingered. Another time she was arranging supplies near a corridor window when she noticed him crossing the courtyard below. His stride was purposeful as always, but just before entering the eastern wing, he paused. His gaze lifted briefly toward her window. Rosalie stepped back immediately, convinced she must have imagined it. Kings did not notice people like her. The thought should have reassured her. Instead, it only made her more confused. Meanwhile, the room continued to grow. Deliveries still arrived. New blankets, soft cushions, dried herbs chosen for their comforting scent. One afternoon, an entire wagon filled with handcrafted woven baskets entered the palace grounds. The workers carrying them looked exhausted after traveling hundreds of miles. Whatever existed behind those doors was being prepared with extraordinary care. Then came the incident that shocked everyone. A young nobleman visiting from the Western Territories decided palace rules did not apply to him. Confident in his status, he attempted to enter the eastern corridor without permission. The guards stopped him immediately. By sunset, he had been escorted from the palace and his invitation to remain at court had quietly disappeared. No public punishment followed. No dramatic confrontation. Yet the message spread quickly. Damian Blackthorne was absolutely serious. Nobody entered that room. Not for any reason. That evening the atmosphere throughout the castle felt different. Servants whispered more cautiously. Nobles avoided discussing the matter too loudly. Even the rumors seemed quieter now. Rosalie sat alone near a small window in the servant quarters, watching snowflakes drift through the darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere above her, hundreds of rooms glowed with candlelight. Somewhere within the eastern wing, guards continued their silent watch. And somewhere inside that carefully protected room, a purpose waited. A purpose hidden beneath every blanket, every basket, every piece of straw. Rosalie wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. She still believed the mystery had nothing to do with her. She had no way of knowing that while the kingdom searched for answers behind locked doors, the answer itself had been quietly walking through the palace halls all along. Winter settled fully over Moonrest Palace, covering rooftops and gardens in a blanket of white that softened the sharp edges of the kingdom. The world looked peaceful from a distance. Rosalie often wished peace felt that simple from the inside. Most mornings began before dawn. She woke in her small room beneath the servant wing, dressed quietly, and started another day that looked almost identical to the one before it. Few people noticed when she arrived. Fewer noticed when she left. That was simply how life worked for someone like her. Rosalie Hart belonged nowhere important. She had no influential family, no noble title, no powerful connections waiting beyond the palace gates. Years ago, after losing the last relatives who had cared for her, she had come to Moonrest searching for stability. She found work, a roof, food, safety. For a long time, she convinced herself that was enough. Yet there were moments when loneliness slipped through the cracks she had built around her heart. Moments when she watched families gather during festivals. Moments when noble daughters laughed together in bright dresses while servants hurried past carrying trays and supplies. Moments when she wondered what it felt like to truly belong somewhere. Those thoughts usually pass quickly. Rosalie had learned not to dwell on things she could not change. But lately, something felt different. The strange feeling she had noticed weeks earlier had not disappeared. Instead, it seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. It appeared in small ways. A sudden warmth when she entered certain hallways. A strange sense of calm whenever she caught sight of Damian Blackthorne from across a crowded room. A feeling she could not explain and certainly could not discuss with anyone else. One afternoon, she was organizing inventory records in a storage room when two senior servants entered, unaware she was there. The king refused another proposal, one whispered. Again, that makes the fourth noble family this season. The second servant shook her head. I do not understand it. Half the kingdom wants an alliance through marriage. Apparently His Majesty has other priorities. Their voices lowered further. Some people think the room is connected to it. Rosalie looked down at the records in her hands. Even after months, the mysterious room remained at the center of every conversation. Yet she was beginning to care less about the room itself and more about the man who had created it. That realization unsettled her immediately. Damian Blackthorne was her king. Nothing more. Their worlds could not have been farther apart. He ruled territories stretching hundreds of miles across the continent. She folded laundry and organized supplies. He attended diplomatic councils. She spent afternoons repairing worn blankets. The distance between them felt impossible. And still, she found herself noticing him. The way he listened more than he spoke. The way frightened servants relaxed whenever he addressed them kindly. The way he always seemed aware of everyone around him, even when they assumed they were invisible. Especially when they assumed they were invisible. A few days later, Rosalie was carrying fresh towels through an upper corridor when she stopped suddenly. Ahead, Damian stood near a window overlooking the snow-covered gardens. He appeared to be alone. She immediately turned to leave without disturbing him. Rosalie. The sound of her name froze her in place. For a moment she thought she had imagined it. Then she slowly turned around. Damian was looking directly at her. Not past her. Not through her. At her. Rosalie stared in complete surprise. Most people in the palace did not know her name. Yet the king had spoken it effortlessly. Your Majesty, she said softly. Damian studied her for a brief moment. His expression remained calm, but something thoughtful lingered in his silver eyes. Then he simply nodded and continued down the corridor. The encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. Yet long after he disappeared from view, Rosalie remained standing there. Because for the first time since arriving at Moonrest Palace, she realized something impossible. The king had never forgotten her name. The moment Damian Blackthorne spoke her name, something changed inside Rosalie Hart. Not because he was the king, not because he had acknowledged her, but because the encounter shattered a belief she had carried for years. Invisible people were supposed to remain invisible. Yet somehow, the most powerful man in the kingdom had seen her all along. The thought followed her everywhere. During breakfast preparations, while organizing storage rooms, while folding blankets beside crackling fireplaces as winter storms swept across the territory. She tried to ignore it. She failed. Days passed. Then a week. The palace grew busier as midwinter celebrations approached. Noble families arrived from neighboring regions. Musicians filled the great hall with music. Decorations appeared throughout the castle. Lanterns glowed warmly against snowy windows. Everywhere Rosalie looked, people seemed excited. Everyone except her. The strange feeling inside her chest had become impossible to ignore. At first it had been a faint pull, a quiet awareness. Now it felt stronger. Restlessness followed her throughout the day. Sleep became difficult. Concentration slipped away. She found herself forgetting simple tasks and needing to repeat them. One afternoon, she stood staring at a shelf for nearly a full minute before realizing she had forgotten what she came to retrieve. Concern slowly replaced confusion. Something was wrong. Rosalie simply did not know what. She told herself it was exhaustion. The palace had been unusually busy. The celebrations required extra work from every servant. That explanation made sense. Yet it never felt completely true. The problem reached its worst point during the royal winter banquet. Hundreds of guests gathered beneath glittering chandeliers. Music drifted through the grand hall. Servants moved constantly between tables carrying food and drinks. Rosalie had spent most of the evening helping in the background, avoiding attention as usual. Then suddenly the noise became overwhelming. Laughter sounded too loud. The crowded room felt too small. Every scent seemed stronger than normal. Her heart began racing for no reason she could understand. She tried to continue working. She lasted less than 10 minutes. A tray nearly slipped from her hands. Panic surged unexpectedly through her chest. Rosalie quietly set the tray aside and stepped away before anyone could notice. She moved quickly through side corridors, desperate for air. The further she traveled from the banquet, the stronger the strange pressure became. It felt as though something inside her was searching for safety and could not find it. By the time she reached an empty hallway, tears of frustration burned behind her eyes. "What is happening to me?" she whispered. The palace around her felt unfamiliar. Cold. Too open. Too exposed. Every instinct urged her to keep moving, though she did not know where to go. She turned another corner and nearly collided with someone. Rosalie froze. Damian stood before her. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then the king's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. As though he immediately understood what she could not. His gaze softened. Rosalie. Her name sounded calm and steady, the exact opposite of how she felt. She tried to answer, but her voice failed. Damian took one step closer. Not enough to frighten her, just enough to reassure her. "You are overwhelmed," he said quietly. Rosalie lowered her eyes. Embarrassment flooded through her. "I am sorry, Your Majesty. I do not know what is wrong with me." For the first time, a faint smile touched Damian's face. Not amusement, not pity, something gentler. "I know exactly what is wrong." Rosalie looked up in confusion. Before she could ask what he meant, Damian extended his hand toward her. The gesture was simple, patient, certain, as though he had been waiting for this moment far longer than she realized. "Come with me," he said. And for reasons she could not explain, Rosalie found herself trusting him. Rosalie stared at Damian's outstretched hand. For a moment, the sounds of the palace seemed distant, as though the bustling celebration existed in another world entirely. The music, the conversations, the laughter drifting through distant hallways all faded beneath the steady calm in the king's silver eyes. He was waiting, not demanding, not commanding, waiting. Slowly, Rosalie placed her hand in his. Warmth immediately spread through her chest. The strange panic that had been building throughout the evening did not disappear completely, but it loosened its grip enough for her to breathe again. Damian gave a small nod and guided her through the quiet corridors of Moonrest Palace. Neither of them spoke. The further they traveled from the grand banquet, the quieter the castle became. Servants stepped aside when they saw the king approaching. Guards straightened immediately, yet nobody questioned where he was going. Eventually, they reached a familiar section of the palace. Rosalie's heartbeat quickened. The eastern wing. For months, this corridor had existed at the center of every rumor. She recognized the stone walls, the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The guards stationed farther ahead. Her steps slowed. Damian continued walking. "Your Majesty," she said softly. "Why are we here?" He glanced toward her. "Because this is where you need to be." The answer only deepened her confusion. Moments later, they reached the massive oak doors. The same doors that had remained closed for months. The same doors nobody except Damian had been permitted to pass. The guards immediately stepped aside. Neither appeared surprised. It was almost as if they had been expecting this moment. Rosalie's pulse quickened again. Damian placed one hand against the door. For a brief second, he simply stood there. Then the lock clicked. The heavy doors slowly opened. Warm air drifted into the corridor. Rosalie froze. The room beyond looked nothing like she had imagined. Every rumor had been wrong. Every theory had failed. There were no ancient artifacts, no hidden treasures, no magical creatures. Instead, she saw comfort. Soft golden straw covered much of the floor, carefully arranged rather than scattered. Thick blankets rested in neat layers. Large cushions filled every corner. Hand-woven rugs added warmth beneath soft lantern light. Shelves held books, dried flowers, and simple decorations chosen with obvious care. The scent of pine, lavender, and cedar filled the room. Everything felt peaceful, safe, welcoming. Rosalie stepped forward without realizing it. The moment she crossed the threshold, the pressure inside her chest eased dramatically. Her shoulders relaxed. The overwhelming restlessness faded. Even her breathing became steadier. She looked around in stunned silence. Her voice barely worked. "What is this place?" Damian watched her carefully. Not the room. Her. As though her reaction mattered more than anything else. "It is a sanctuary," he said quietly. Rosalie turned slowly. For who? For the first time that evening, genuine emotion appeared behind Damian's calm expression. Months of patience, concern, hope. "For you." The words left her completely speechless. Rosalie stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "For me," she repeated. Damian nodded once. Every blanket, every cushion, every detail. His gaze moved around the room. "They were chosen for your comfort." Her mind struggled to process what she was hearing. Nothing about it made sense. She was a servant, an omega with no title and no importance. Why would the king spend months creating something like this for her? Rosalie looked back at the room. Suddenly, she noticed things she had missed before. The colors matched the blankets she often preferred while working. The books reflected subjects she frequently borrowed from the palace library. Even the dried flowers were varieties she had once mentioned liking during a conversation months ago. A conversation she barely remembered. Damian had remembered. The realization stole her breath. While the kingdom had searched for answers behind these doors, Damian had been quietly building a place where she would never have to feel forgotten again. Rosalie could not stop staring at the room. Her eyes moved slowly from the carefully arranged blankets to the shelves, from the woven baskets to the soft lantern glow that painted everything in warm gold. Nothing about it felt accidental. Every detail carried intention. Every corner felt thoughtfully prepared. Yet the greatest mystery remained standing only a few feet away. "Why?" she finally whispered. Damian remained silent for several seconds. The question deserved more than a simple answer. Rosalie watched him carefully. For the first time since she had known him, the king seemed to be choosing his words with unusual caution. "Because I knew this day would come," he said quietly. Rosalie frowned. "What day?" His silver eyes met hers. "The day you would need a place where you felt safe." The answer only deepened her confusion. Damian stepped farther into the room. His hand brushed lightly across the back of a nearby chair. "6 months ago," he said, "you helped one of the kitchen workers after she became ill during a winter storm." Rosalie blinked. She barely remembered the incident. Anyone would have helped her. Damian shook his head. "No, most people were busy. You stayed." He looked toward another corner of the room. 3 months later, you spent your only free afternoon repairing blankets for the orphanage outside the city." Rosalie stared at him. "How do you know that?" A faint smile appeared. "Because I asked." Her breath caught. Damian continued. "You leave extra food for the elderly groundskeeper whenever the weather turns cold. You return books to the library shelves even when they are not your responsibility. You remember the names of people others overlook." Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. These were small things. Ordinary things. She had never imagined anyone noticed them. Yet somehow Damian knew all of them. The realization left her speechless. "I did not build this room in a few weeks," he said. "I built it over months." His gaze moved across the carefully prepared sanctuary. Every choice was made with one person in mind. Rosalie's heart beat faster. Damian crossed the room and picked up a folded blanket from one of the chairs. This came from a village almost 300 miles north of Moonrest. He ran a hand across the fabric. The first shipment was rejected. Rosalie stared. "Rejected?" He nodded. The material was too rough. Her eyes widened slightly. Damian set the blanket down and gestured towards several cushions nearby. Those were replaced 3 times. 3 times. None of them seemed comfortable enough. Rosalie laughed softly before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them. Damian's expression softened immediately at hearing it. "You did all this?" she asked. "Personally, most of it." Rosalie looked around again. Suddenly, she remembered the wagons. The deliveries. The endless shipments everyone had spent months discussing. "The straw," she said quietly. "You inspected every shipment." Damian nodded once. "Not all of it met my standards." Rosalie could hardly believe what she was hearing. The mighty Alpha King who commanded an entire kingdom had spent months worrying about blankets, pillows, flowers, and straw. Not for political gain. Not for diplomacy. For her comfort. The thought felt impossible. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked. This time Damian answered immediately. "Because from the moment I realized who you were, nothing about your well-being felt unimportant." Silence filled the room. Rosalie's chest tightened. Not with fear. Not with confusion. Something deeper. Something warmer. For years she had moved through life believing she was invisible. Forgotten. Easy to overlook. Yet standing inside this room, surrounded by months of quiet care, she could no longer believe that story. Someone had noticed her. Someone had remembered every small kindness she thought the world ignored. And somehow, that someone had been the king all along. The following morning, Moonrest Palace woke to chaos. Not loud chaos. The dangerous kind. The kind that moved through corridors in hushed voices and concerned glances. Somehow, word had spread. No one knew exactly how. Perhaps a servant had seen Rosalie enter the eastern wing. Perhaps a guard had spoken carelessly. Perhaps the truth had simply become impossible to hide. By noon, half the palace knew the mysterious sanctuary had not been built for a noblewoman, a foreign princess, or the daughter of an influential alpha. It had been built for Rosalie Hart. The reaction was immediate. Shock, disbelief, confusion. Rosalie felt every stare as she walked through the castle. Conversations stopped when she approached. Groups suddenly fell silent. People who had never looked at her before now watched her openly. The attention made her deeply uncomfortable. She wanted to disappear. Unfortunately, disappearing was no longer possible. That evening, Damian summoned the royal council. Representatives from noble houses across the kingdom gathered inside the grand chamber. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors, while dozens of influential figures filled the room with tense anticipation. Rosalie remained outside at first, uncertain why she had been asked to attend. Then the doors opened. A royal attendant approached her directly. "His Majesty requests your presence." Her heart skipped. Slowly, Rosalie entered the chamber. The room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. She immediately wished they had not. Noblewomen studied her simple appearance. Advisors exchanged puzzled looks. Several aristocrats seemed openly offended. Rosalie lowered her gaze and tried not to panic. Then she noticed Damian standing at the center of the chamber. The moment she saw him, some of her fear eased. He looked calm, certain, completely unshaken by the tension surrounding him. An elderly council member rose first. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "the kingdom deserves clarification." Murmurs of agreement followed. Another noble stood. "The eastern wing has been sealed for months." A third added, "Resources were used. Questions remain unanswered." The chamber grew louder. Not angry, demanding. Everyone wanted an explanation. Through it all, Damian remained silent. Waiting, listening. Finally, he lifted one hand. The room immediately quieted. Rosalie had never seen authority command a room so effortlessly. Damian's silver eyes swept across the gathered nobles. "You want answers," he said. "Then I will give them." Complete silence followed. Every person present leaned forward. Damian turned slightly toward Rosalie. His expression softened for the briefest moment before he faced the council once more. The sanctuary was built intentionally. His voice carried throughout the chamber. Every decision was mine. No one interrupted. Every shipment, every design, every order. Damian paused. All of it was for Rosalie Hart. Shock rippled through the room. Rosalie's breath caught. Even though she already knew the truth, hearing him say it before the entire kingdom felt overwhelming. Several nobles immediately exchanged stunned glances. One finally spoke. "Why?" The question echoed through the chamber. Damian answered without hesitation. "Because she matters." Silence returned. Heavy, complete. The nobleman blinked. "Your Majesty, she is a servant." Damian's gaze sharpened slightly. "She is kind." Another voice spoke. "She has no title. She has character." A third objected. "She possesses no influence." Damian's response came instantly. "She does not need it." Rosalie felt tears threaten to form. For years she had listened to people measure worth through status, wealth, and family names. Yet Damian rejected every standard they offered. Then the king stepped forward and delivered the truth no one expected. "Rosalie Hart is not someone I chose despite who she is." His voice remained steady. "She is someone I value because of who she is." The chamber fell completely silent. And for the first time, the kingdom began to understand why its king had spent months protecting a secret that had never been a secret at all. It had been a promise. The days that followed changed Moonrest Palace in ways Rosalie Hart never expected. The whispers did not disappear overnight. Some nobles still struggled to understand. Some servants still looked surprised whenever they saw her walking through the halls. Yet something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in her life, Rosalie no longer felt invisible. Not because people suddenly paid attention to her, because she finally understood her own worth. Damian never asked her to become someone different. He never demanded that she learn court politics or transform herself into the image others expected. Instead, he treated her exactly as he always had, with patience, respect, and a quiet certainty that never wavered. As winter deepened, Rosalie spent more time inside the sanctuary. The room that had once been the kingdom's greatest mystery slowly became her favorite place in the palace. Not because it was beautiful, though it was. Not because it was comfortable, though every detail had been chosen with extraordinary care. She loved it because it felt like the first place in the world created with her happiness in mind. Some evenings she sat beside the lanterns and read books from the shelves Damian had stocked himself. Other nights, she simply listened to the wind outside while surrounded by warmth and calm. The strange restlessness that had troubled her for months disappeared completely whenever she entered the room. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. One snowy evening, Rosalie stood near a window overlooking the palace gardens. Snowflakes drifted through the darkness like tiny stars. Behind her, the sanctuary glowed with soft, golden light. She heard the door open quietly. She already knew who it was. Damian stepped inside carrying a small wooden box. "What is that?" she asked. A faint smile touched his face. "Something I found in the royal archives." He placed the box on a nearby table. Inside rested a delicate silver ornament shaped like a moonlit flower. Rosalie stared at it in surprise. "It is beautiful. It belonged to a queen long ago," Damian explained. According to the records, she believed every person deserved one place where they felt completely safe. Rosalie looked around the room. Her eyes softened immediately. She was right. Damian's gaze remained on her. "Yes," he said quietly. She was. The silence that followed felt comfortable. Easy. Neither rushed to fill it. Eventually, Rosalie walked toward one of the large cushioned areas near the center of the sanctuary and settled comfortably among the blankets. She looked around once more. The straw, the lanterns, the shelves, the countless details that had confused an entire kingdom. All of it suddenly seemed very simple. It had never been about luxury. It had never been about status. It had been about care. About someone deciding that another person's comfort mattered. Damian moved toward the doorway. "You are leaving?" Rosalie asked. "Only for the evening." He paused near the door. "I have several reports waiting." She smiled. "Being king sounds exhausting." Damian laughed softly. The sound was rare enough to feel like a gift. "Sometimes." He opened the door and looked back one last time. Rosalie noticed something then. Not just the warmth in his expression. His position. He had stopped beside the entrance without thinking, instinctively placing himself between the room and the outside world. The realization made her smile. Months earlier, she had believed she was forgotten. Months earlier, an entire kingdom had wondered why its king spent so much time protecting a secret room. Now she knew the answer. It was never the room he had been protecting. It was her. Outside, snow continued falling across Moonrest Palace. Inside, Rosalie settled comfortably beneath a blanket and listened to the peaceful quiet surrounding her. And just beyond the door, Damian Blackthorne remained nearby, watching over the place he had built with his own hands. For the first time in her life, Rosalie fell asleep without fear of being overlooked, forgotten, or left behind. Because while the kingdom slept under the protection of its king, the king had chosen to spend his strength protecting her.